So what are you doing, Kazmir?
I'm reporting for the Copenhagen DOX. I'm the Bulgarian reporter.
Yeah, what are you doing right now?
I'm preparing for the interview with Joshua Oppenheimer, who is going to share with us his core vision and ideas about the movies and how he made them, some stories.
What is the movie?
The movie that we are going to comment with him is called The Look of Silence, and it is the follow-up movie of The Art of Killing. He made him Oscar-nominated director in 2014. He was nominated in the documentary category of the Academy Awards.
So when is the interview?
The interview is going to happen in 2 hours. We are going to meet in Grand Cinema, and we are going to talk about the life of the survivors, since this is the main topic of the movie, the survivors after the mass murder that happened in Indonesia. And he was the one who confronted many of the families of the people who were killing, and also the people who survived this Holocaust.
Okay, thank you.
Tidak, saya menganggap itu tidak besar.
Bagaimana mungkin tidak besar? 1 juta orang dibunuh atau lebih.
Sebenarnya dia politik.
Jadi kepiye mak perasaan mama tinggal cerek di antara pembunuh anak imam.
Kalau kita kaji dulu begini, kita ingin dulu. Wah, udah payah akan kejadian seperti dulu. Pasti akan kejadian.
Seandainya aku berbicara di era Orde Baru sama Bapak, apa yang akan Bapak lakukan dengan aku?
Nggak bisa kita bayangkan ya.
Hi, my name is Krasimira. I'm the Bulgarian reporter. I'm sitting here with Joshua Oppenheimer, who is an Oscar-nominated director known for the movie Act of Killing. And now he's coming with his follow-up, The Look of Silence. Hi, Josh.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Tell me about your movie, The Look of Silence.
Well, The Look of Silence follows a family of survivors of the 1965 genocide who found out how their son was murdered through my work with the perpetrators that I filmed, in fact, before I started making the act of killing in 2003, 2004. They found out how their son was killed, and the movie follows a young man, the youngest son in this family, who was born after the genocide, but whose oldest brother was killed. It follows this man, Adi Rukun, an optometrist, as he goes and confronts all of the men involved with his brother's murder. And those confrontations are unprecedented in Indonesia, and I think unprecedented in the history of documentary film, because I don't think we've ever seen a film where survivors confront perpetrators while the perpetrators are still completely in power. And so it's dangerous, it's dramatic, but at the same time the film is a kind of poem about the necessity of breaking silence and also the trauma that comes out when that silence is broken, because fear, decades and decades of fear, have prevented the trauma from coming to the surface.
And how do they manage this fear? How the life of the survivors continue after?
Well, that's exactly what I think the film is trying to explore. It's trying to show, what that. It's not just trying to have you. It's not just trying to have you see what this fear is like. It's trying to have you, as a viewer, experience somehow viscerally in your stomach, in your heart, what it's like to be a survivor living for decade after decade in silence and in fear. I think the most clear manifestation of the fear is silence. People are afraid to talk. The survivors say again and again in the movie, let the past be past. And they don't say it because they really have forgotten the past, but rather because they've been threatened not to participate in it, not to speak about it. And the perpetrators will say again and again in the movie, let the past be past, as a threat to the survivors, saying, don't talk about this. And there's maybe one image in the movie that was shot by the main character, not by me, of the main character's father, now an old man who's in fact so old that he's forgotten many things, including his own son who was murdered. And yet the murder of his son traumatized the whole family and in a sense destroyed his life. So there's this image of him as an old man in a state of confusion and senility, really, dementia, crawling on the floor in his own house, saying that he's lost, saying he's wandered into someone else's house. And Ari, the main character, shot this scene telling me, my father was confused all day. I was trying to comfort him all day. I couldn't. Whenever I would put my arm on him, he'd get more scared. So at some point I picked up the camera you gave me and started to film. And I filmed it, and I was crying while filming this, he said, because it shows that my father has forgotten the event that destroyed his life, forgotten the son whose loss has destroyed his life, but he hasn't forgotten the fear. He's trapped in this prison of fear, and he'll never get out of it because he has lost the key. He can't even find the door. He can't remember the source of his fear, so he'll never be able to talk it through. He'll never be able to work it through. He's lost the opportunity to heal. So what does that do to human beings, to a family, to a mother, to a father, to millions of Indonesians, to a whole society, when they've been deprived of the opportunity to work through trauma for so long and stuck in silence? That's what the film tries to not just have you empathize with, but have you experience in your flesh and in your stomach.
But why it happened? Why do those people killed? And why is this silence after that?
In 1965, there was a Western-sponsored regime change in Indonesia where they murdered anybody opposed to the new military dictatorship, which was supported by the West. They accused them of being communists, but most of them weren't communists. They were trade unionists, teachers, doctors, the ethnic Chinese. Ari's older brother was simply the leader of the village farmers cooperative. He wasn't a member of the Communist Party at all. Anyone who was potentially opposed to the new regime was called a communist, and then within 6 months, somewhere between 500,000 and 2.5 million people were killed with the West's support. The United States provided the death squads, or provided the army with lists of thousands of names of people saying, kill all these people. So go after everybody. We want everyone on this list killed. These were public intellectuals, public figures the US wanted killed, not communists, but journalists, outspoken intellectuals. Why did the US want these people killed? Because they were potential opponents of the new regime. Why did the US care about killing people who weren't communists? Because in fact, it wasn't a battle between capitalism and communism. It was a battle for the same thing that the United States always fights for in its foreign policy, which is the right of American corporations to have exploitative access to cheap labor and natural resources across the developing world. And any potential opponent to that was an enemy of the United States and then called a communist. There's a very telling moment in the film, two telling moments. One, we see an NBC documentary, an American documentary from 1967, where we hear the killings of 500,000 people talked about as something positive, as good news. But then we also hear that Goodyear, the largest rubber corporation in the world that makes harvest rubber, natural rubber, latex to make tires, is on their North Sumatran rubber plantation just a few miles from where we filmed the movie. It was using slave labor throughout the genocide and after the genocide, and then at night the workers would go back to the prison camp and be dispatched out to death squads to be killed. Now this is exactly what German companies did around Auschwitz during World War II, and it is a pretty important stain on America's record of being a force for democracy and freedom and human rights in the post-World War II world, that our corporations actually did the same thing that German corporations did at Auschwitz. There's another moment in the film where one of the death squad leaders says, I should be rewarded with a cruise to the United States, because it was America that taught us to do this and taught us to hate the communists.
So, but then what is the danger to do this? Because you're opposing your team as well. A lot of the people participating are anonymous.
Well, it's simply, the danger stems entirely from the fact that the perpetrators and their proteges are still holding power throughout the country. There's, and not only do they still hold power, but they still have active paramilitary organizations that became active during the killings. We see them, one of the biggest ones, Panchasila Youth, in the act of killing. And those paramilitary organizations are still able to commit violence, murder, beatings, with disappearance, with impunity. They face no consequences legally for doing that to people. Certainly the leaders don't. If anyone were ever to get in trouble, it would be the lowest ranking thugs. And institutionally, legally, the military in Indonesia enjoys impunity. They cannot be tried for anything. Any crime committed by a member of the armed forces in Indonesia cannot be put on trial in a civilian court. They can only be tried in a military tribunal, and only if the military chooses to prosecute the crime. So the military and the paramilitary forces in Indonesia still enjoy absolute impunity, and that made it very dangerous for us to confront the perpetrators. People would often ask, how did you, when they'd see the act of killing, weren't you afraid making this film? And the act of killing actually wasn't physically frightening to make, it was emotionally frightening. Whereas The Look of Silence, because we were actually confronting the perpetrators, was emotionally healing, but physically frightening.
And what motivates you to do this, to expose you to this danger, to this risk yourself?
I think there's two things. I think I care a great deal about the consequences for all of us when we human beings commit evil. The lies we tell, the stories we tell, the way we're bullied into silence. Maybe I think there was a period when I was bullied as a child. I think that maybe made me feel particularly anguished about the treatment of the survivors when we started working together more than a decade ago and the army threatened everybody to not participate in the film. I just thought, this is so wrong. My family comes from a background of Holocaust. My father's family narrowly escaped the Holocaust, or his parents narrowly escaped the Holocaust. And I grew up very much with the message that the aim of all politics, certainly, probably even the aim of all culture and art, is to prevent these things from ever happening again. And not just in the narrow sense of never again to us, which actually ensures that such things continue to happen again, but actually in the human sense, never again anywhere. And they keep happening again, and they keep happening again. And I think, in fact, not only do they happen again, worse, the perpetrators usually win.
Then how a change could happen, how transformation is
well, Indonesians will have to, sometimes people ask me, Joshua, why didn't you make a trilogy? Because it's more common, perhaps, than a pair of films or a diptych. And my answer is that a trilogy is more open-ended. I mean, a diptych is more open-ended. And what I mean by that is the act of killing opened a space for Indonesians to talk about their past. It catalyzed a transformation, or helped to catalyze a transformation in how the country talks about its past. The media reports on the genocide as a genocide, and they debate the ongoing legacy of the genocide, the corruption, the impunity, the thuggery, the fear. In the aftermath of the act of killing, which was screened thousands of times across Indonesia and downloaded millions of times across Indonesia, in the aftermath of that comes the look of silence, showing how urgently Indonesia needs truth and reconciliation, and how it's within our grasp. Ari, the main character, shows through his dignified example that it's actually possible, that there can be truth and reconciliation. And he fails, because in the film, to get anything like reconciliation, I suppose because you cannot have a truth and reconciliation cannot be a one-person process. You need a social movement. So if there's a third part, if there's a trilogy, the third part has to be written now by the people of Indonesia in building the social movement that will cause the social change for truth and reconciliation to finally come.
So do you think that in these terms your film will help for this social change?
Well, the act of killing, as I said, made it possible for people to talk about the problem. Before that, they couldn't talk about the problem, and you can't fix a problem if you can't talk about it. The Look of Silence had its early days yet, but it had its Indonesian premiere 2 days ago. It was hosted officially by the government, by the National Human Rights Commission and the Jakarta Arts Council, in Jakarta's largest theater, an 850-person venue. It was sold out, so they screened it twice. Ari, the main character, came and spoke after the screenings and received a long-standing ovation. The reaction was incredible. We had the Film Censorship Board saying, "We know you didn't submit the act of killing to us, but please submit this film to us." We didn't submit the act of killing because we were afraid it would be banned, and if it's banned, it becomes a crime to watch the film, and that in turn becomes an excuse for the paramilitaries or the army to physically attack screenings. So we didn't want to take that risk. We built instead a community infrastructure for getting the film out in other ways. But now they've said, please send us this film, meaning they want it to come out. I don't know if we will. That's not it's not my choice. It's up to the team in Indonesia. The National Human Rights Commission has talked about now we need to move forward with truth and reconciliation. We really need it. So I'm hopeful. I've never been more optimistic. That said, the army and the paramilitary groups will not relinquish their impunity without a fight. It's going to require a popular movement to demand true rule of law in Indonesia, and to demand that the new president actually deliver on his many progressive promises. There's a new president, Jokowi, as he's popularly known, who wants to make Indonesia a democracy, but depends on oligarchs for his power. So unless he can if he can get enough grassroots support, it's my hope that he'll be able to shift his dependency from the oligarchs onto a popular movement and then be able to deliver on his promises. But all of that depends on the people of Indonesia and the government of Indonesia.
And who are the people behind, who support you, who forced this film to happen?
Well, it's the human rights community and its survivors and its younger Indonesians who are tired of being lied to and tired of living in fear and tired of raising their children in fear.
And do you think that this community grows now?
I think it's growing, absolutely, absolutely. And the election of a president who is seen by many as coming sympathetic to that community, of course, is tremendously encouraging to everybody.
And are you planning to come back there?
Until I stop receiving regular threats from the army, paramilitary groups, persons unknown really, until I stop receiving regular threats, or there's a guarantee of my security and my safety and my ability to leave the country without ending up safely.
But is it safe now for you?
No, it's not. Until that happens, I can't return, or until there's genuine rule of law. So long as so long as the enemies of my work and the enemies of human rights enjoy impunity, I'm certainly one of their number one enemies, and it's dangerous for me to return.
So you're not planning to go back in Indonesia, but what are your future plans for your next project?
I have so many ideas that I'm developing, but they relate to, like the act of killing, I suppose, dreams and fear. I don't want to say more yet.
Do you want to continue in this direction, to focus on situations where there are conflicts between political...
I don't know about that. I think what I'm really interested in is self-deception. And I think I want to focus on the methods that I developed in the act of killing in particular. The visual language of the Look of Silence was a big innovation for me. And people will often say it's more conventional than the act of killing, but that's only true if you think the act of killing's main innovation is its method. In fact, I think the Look of Silence, formally, is felt just as innovative and experimental to me as the act of killing. But I think the method in the act of killing as a means of working with people to make a film.
What is the specialty?
It's about giving people the opportunity to stage themselves and being honest about the fact that that's what they always do anyways in a documentary. And you can either take advantage of all the insights that makes visible, namely that when people start performing in front of a camera, they start revealing how they want to be seen. And from that, you can at least guess how they really see themselves. And if the way they want to be seen is very far from who they really are, then a crack should start to appear. And that method is really at the core of the act of killing, and it's really a way of using the nonfiction camera as a kind of prism through which you can see all of these hitherto invisible stories and fantasies and fictions that make us what we are. It's a way, so I think the state of nature of nonfiction film is not to document the world in a transparent way and not to bear witness, but actually to make visible how all the things we consider factual are really the product of fiction and fantasy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this interview.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Koyo duku cek hartane wong PKI. Enak lan kene juga hartane. Sing lanang dibunuh, bojone dikerjai mbek dheke.
Jadi kepiye mak perasaane mama tinggal cerek di antara pembunuh anak mama. Tiap hari mama ndelok raye wong iku.
Rasanya enggak enak. Lewat-lewat iku pun dek petuk pun aku dek pun gak negara ngono buan juga setengah mati. Benci aku.
Tidak, saya